What's up, language leaders? Welcome back. This is Erica. So if you've been learning a language for several months, but you still can't imagine yourself speaking it with someone, or maybe you've had conversations that you feel went terribly and actually left you quite discouraged, then this video is for you. Today, we're going to discuss my top 3 tips for making your conversations go a lot smoother. Now, I drop tips like this every week, so if you're new to the family, then you'll want to subscribe and smash the bell notification so that you don't miss out. So the following tips are based on my experience having learned Spanish to fluency and also what my students have found most effective. And in addition, what I'm personally doing currently now that I'm learning another language. Let's begin. So tip number 1 is something that I call preparation and presentation. So what does this mean? Well, when I was learning Spanish, and for those of you that don't know, I learned Spanish with the purpose of participating in an educational community work with the Spanish-speaking population in my local area. Back then I was living in Kentucky in the United States. So when I was learning Spanish and being trained to participate in this community work, I was periodically given presentations that I would need to prepare and present in front of a group of people. So I knew very little Spanish at this point, but we were given the materials ahead of time. So I was always working with a certain theme, and I even had access to the English version of the same materials. So using these materials, I was able to organize my thoughts and prepare a presentation in my own words. Now, after preparing that presentation, I would practice with myself out loud multiple times. All the time, guys. In the shower, driving, all the time, I would practice these presentations with myself. So because of all of this, after I would give a presentation and when Spanish-speaking individuals would come up to me afterward to talk about the subject or perhaps give me a compliment, I could converse with the limited vocabulary that I had because I knew this particular theme that we were discussing well, and we could actually have small bits of meaningful conversation. So emphasis here on small bits, guys. I spoke very little Spanish at this time, but since we were discussing something that I had spent several days preparing, I had built up quite a bit of vocabulary around that one subject. But when people would try to talk to me about virtually any other subject, I would draw a blank. Why? Well, as I mentioned, my vocabulary was limited. I knew how to talk about the things that I had prepared and was familiar with, but I couldn't just talk about anything under the sun. But in any case, what ended up being the result of this preparation and presentation phase of my life? Well, in spite of those awkward moments, those early conversations that I was able to have really helped me to develop confidence in speaking. And they also help me to internalize the most common vocabulary that comes up regardless of the theme of the conversation. I mean, think about it, whether you're discussing local events or a sport that you enjoy doing, all of those common verbs like to be and to do and to make and all of the conjugations of those and all of just the do and the to and the from. And you're going to be using those words regardless of the subject that you are speaking about. So these little conversations in the beginning really helped me to internalize all of that common vocabulary, which simply began to build upon each other and help me with all future conversations. So how do we apply all of this? Well, when you are preparing to have a conversation with your tutor or your teacher or speaking partner, especially in the beginning when you're new and you don't have a wide range of vocabulary to grab from, well, you're going to want to prepare and present by doing the following things. Choose a topic that you're interested in or that you simply want to talk about. Ideally, this is going to be something relevant to your life, something that you may discuss with a person in everyday conversation. Consume one or more pieces of content on that information. So by that I mean perhaps an article, maybe a news article, or an article specifically about this hobby or your job that you do. You can also watch YouTube videos, for example, about that subject. Just consume at least one or possibly multiple pieces of content on that information. So do that several times, maybe read your article several times, watch your video several times during the days leading up to the conversation. Practice discussing the topic with yourself. Choose a few vocabulary words, again, specific to that subject, that you haven't quite mastered yet. Probably no more than 10, I would recommend, and write those down. So when you're having your conversation with your speaking partner, actively try to use those words during the conversation. And if possible, if you can tell your speaking partner that you're working on these words so that they can also make an attempt to use them regularly during the conversation, that's going to be even better. You may be able to even send them those words ahead of time. For example, if you're using an online tutor such as italki, which is the platform that I recommend, then you can have communication with your tutor ahead of time and send them that list of words that you really want to be working on during the conversation. So what are the benefits of this? Well, you'll be more likely and more motivated to begin speaking sooner rather than later. You'll feel more comfortable during your speaking session. You will master the vocabulary of certain subjects before moving on to the next one, which is key because we can only learn so many new words at one time. But again, as we discussed earlier, those most common words that are used in the language are going to be coming up in any type of conversation, regardless of the subject. Even your teacher or tutor will love you because as teachers who actually want results for our students, we really like it when the students are clear on their goals, their short-term goals, and know what they want. Something much more specific than fluency. By the way, as we go through these, you guys drop comments for me letting me know if you have tried any of these and how they've worked for you. So simplify your speech. So a common mistake that I see all the time is that language learners often try to take exactly what they're thinking in their native language and translate it exactly into the target language. But this does nothing more than hinder the flow of the conversation. Okay, so let's take an example sentence. Let's say you want to say the following in Spanish. I'm currently a nurse, but I used to work as a teacher. Okay, so here would be an example of a correct translation of that sentence. Actualmente soy enfermera, pero antes trabajaba como profesora. Actualmente soy enfermera, pero antes trabajaba como profesora. Okay, well, what if you don't know all of those words and you're like, currently? Oh my goodness, you know what? What is that in Spanish? Used to? Is there even a word for that? Or is it just going to be part of the verb, you know? And you're word for word trying to translate exactly what you have in English in your head. Well, will you get hung up on what you don't know? Or will you push forward and simplify your speech so that you can still express yourself, even if it's not 100% correct or the way that you want it to say it? So let's imagine that you choose the latter option. And so you might say, ahora soy enfermera, pero en el pasado trabajo como profesora. Okay? Is this sentence completely correct? No. The verb is incorrect. Trabajo should be trabajaba. Saying en el pasado, you know, in the past, you worked as a teacher. I mean, that you could say that. It sounds a little awkward. Maybe a native speaker wouldn't say that. But would you be understood? Most definitely. So your tutor might say, antes trabajabas como profesora. Now, we're imagining that you're a female here. That's why we're using the words enfermera and profesora. I should have mentioned that earlier. So your tutor says, antes trabajabas como profesora, and you start to understand, okay, trabajaba, that's what I should have said. And well, maybe you know that you need to take off the S if you're going to refer to yourself now and say trabajaba. Maybe you don't. Your tutor's there to help you with that as well. But you got your point across. And now you have an alternate way of expressing yourself that sounds a little more natural, and we can continue with the conversation. So, when we're learning a language, we need to develop some humility. We have to be okay with sounding like Tarzan in the beginning. Tarzan like Jane. We all know what he means, and it's kind of cute. So does this mean that we're not concerned with correcting our mistakes? No, of course not. But we're not going to let our mistakes or our desire for perfection limit the amount that we try to speak. We'll learn so much about the language through the act of speaking itself, through the act of making mistakes and receiving helpful corrections from a person who is genuinely interested in helping us. That is important. Remember, guys, communication is more important than perfection. Tip number 3, our final tip here. Expose yourself to massive amounts of input in your target language. So the more you expose yourself to the language through large amounts of input, the more you will naturally absorb the patterns of speech. A lot of input will not only give you more vocabulary over time, but it will also help you hear how phrases and sentences are most naturally formed in real speech by native speakers. So this will help you sound more like a native speaker, and you'll become quicker to express yourself because eventually you won't have to think as much. Here are a few tips on input. You'll want to expose yourself to speech that is similar to how you want to speak. Why are you learning this language? Are you going to be dealing with business situations? Do you just want to be able to communicate with friends? So are you going to expose yourself to more sophisticated or casual speech? That will depend on your goals. I remember when I was learning Spanish, native speakers would tell me, wow, your vocabulary, it's just so sophisticated. You use words that, we don't even always think to use. And that was because I would read a lot, and what I was reading kind of had a higher register of speech. So if I'm having a normal conversation, I may have tended to say nevertheless instead of but, Now that wasn't intentional, that was just the material that I had on hand, but it is something to take into account. Again, because we can only absorb so many words at one time, it will be best to focus on the type of speech that you want to end up developing. So you can combine more passive listening with active study sessions. Do both. As you do activities around the house, as you drive, listen to your target language, but also have dedicated study sessions where you're not only listening, but you're also trying to perhaps rearrange those sentences and determine how you can take that input and translate it into speech, translate it into conversations that you are going to have. So that's easier said than done. So if you haven't already, I do encourage you to download the Spanish Fluency Blueprint. This is a study plan that will help you turn your input into actual conversations. Now, several of the resources that I mentioned in this blueprint are Spanish specific. However, you can take the plan and apply it to any language. Don't be shy. In review, how do we make our conversations go more smoothly? 1, we prepare and present. So we take a subject that we want to speak about, we consume information, we receive input on that subject. We pick out some vocabulary words that we're really interested in remembering and that we haven't quite mastered, and we use those words actively during our conversation. We simplify our speech. So we may not be able to say exactly what we're wanting to say with the same eloquence that we may say it in our native language, but we need to be okay with that. Communication is far more important than perfection. We want to consume massive amounts of input. The more input we put into our brains, the more natural our speech is eventually going to be. Alright guys, I hope this video provided you with lots of value. If so, then please give me a like. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss us next Tuesday. And I will be placing these slides for your review if you would like in my free resource library. So I'm going to link to that below as well. It's been great guys, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.